A very warm welcome indeed to today's Reform Policy Summit, 21st Century Connectivity Lessons for the UK. My name is Andrew Hortonby and I'm Director of Reform, which is an independent, non-party think tank whose mission is to find a better way to deliver public services and economic prosperity in the UK. Look, I'm so thrilled that such a high-quality audience has decided to give up their morning to come today. I'm extremely grateful to you. I will also signal my relief that in this event on connectivity, the Wi-Fi does actually work, and that really would have been pretty difficult if it hadn't. The reason we're here, I think, is because the theme is so important and so timely. I would frame it around productivity, which is, one of the biggest policy questions of this Parliament. Chapter 7 of the Treasury's Productivity Plan, produced at the time of the budget, as we know, deals precisely with broadband infrastructure, saying that, I'll quote the words, reliable, high-quality broadband connections support growth in productivity, efficiency and labour force participation across the whole economy, and again, sort of repeats about more efficient businesses, access to new markets, and supporting new forms of employment. So these are absolutely core policy questions for this Parliament. And as we saw, the Prime Minister spoke on his ambitions for broadband only 3 days ago. So we're talking about the right subject. We will certainly talk about the benefits of broadband infrastructure. I hope we will also talk about getting the policy framework right. One of our consistent findings at Reform is that the constraint on new infrastructure is not actually usually a lack of money. It's the quality of the policy framework and the stability of the policy framework. So I hope we can devote some good attention to that too. As the programme makes clear, we will divide the discussion into 3 very punchy plenary sessions on the current position in the UK and the possibilities of ultra-fast technology for the UK, on international examples, and lastly the question of investment. And we will finish with an excellent keynote speech by John Fingleton, the former Chief Executive of the Office for Fair Trading. There will be time for Q&A in each panel, but of course, please do tweet like mad. The chairs of the sessions will see the tweets, and we can sort of feed that into the discussion. And the tag is Reform Connectivity, as it says on the front of the brochure. And I would like to just finish these introductory remarks by giving my deep thanks, firstly to our sponsors today, Sky, who do a huge amount to support the public policy debate in the UK, connectivity today, but also other subjects as well. My deep thanks to them on all of our behalf, and we will hear from Andrew Griffiths, Sky CFO, later this morning. And my deep thanks also go to David Miller and the Reform team and Katie Blower and the Hanover team, who have done the legwork today and have got us in this wonderful location, and no one is allowed to look at the view until the coffee break and networking. So let me introduce our first panel. Where are we? And it's important to get the baseline. Where are we in the UK, and what are the possibilities? I think this is an excellent panel. I'll just briefly introduce now. Their biographies are in the brochure. Matt Houlihan, Head of Government Affairs for Cisco in the UK and Ireland, a former advisor to the UK government on science and innovation. Dr. Peter Cochrane, CEO and Chairman of Cochrane Associates, which advises international industries and governments around the world, former Chief Technical Officer at BT. Dr. Adam Marshall, Executive Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the British Chambers of Commerce, and Dana Toback, Managing Director of Hyper Optic, the fibre broadband provider. Each speaker has no more than 6, 7, 8 minutes each. We'll have the excellent presentations, time for Q&A. Let me please ask Matt Houlihan to come up and give the first presentation. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. What I'm going to do is talk through some forecasting that Cisco does every year called the Visual Networking Index. Some of you may be familiar with this, but hopefully in this presentation, what I'm going to do is present a very UK-specific forecast. So what we're going to look at is what we think the demand and some of the features of the network are going to be over the next 5-year period. So we're going to look from the current year all the way through to 2019 in this one. We do this every year, as I said. We look back 1 year and we look forward 5. But we'll always, unlike some other forecasters, we'll always say how we've done. So these are our forecasts made in 2010 for the growth between 2009 and 2014. And as you can see, we were within 10% on the conservative side. So we're pretty confident in the figures. They always come out at around 10% or so. So what's our top line conclusion? Well, so we're predicting that growth in terms of IP traffic in the UK will be 27% on average per year between 2014 and 2019. So that's a near tripling of network growth. So that's pretty huge. Let's look at more detail. So not many more people relative to current population are going to be added in the UK. However, we're going to see a near doubling of devices from 318 million to 615 million, a doubling of fixed broadband speeds up to nearly 50 megabytes per second. And importantly, and this is one of the main conclusions I want to get across to you, is more video viewing. So last year, 67% of IP traffic in the UK was video. We think it's going to be 82% of traffic by 2019. So a big jump in terms of the amount of IP traffic, the percentage of IP traffic that's going to be taken up by video. And that just illustrates that in a bit more detail. So as you can see there, the growth in terms of the percentage of video traffic is going to be pretty huge over the next 5 years within that overall framework of 27% annual growth in overall internet traffic. So video is really the story here. But it's also very much the story when we're talking about mobile traffic. As you can see on the top right, we're predicting around a 50% annual growth rate just in mobile IP traffic growth over the next 5 years. But also importantly, and it's the same trend as with fixed, or overall I should say, that mobile video is going to be ever more important within that overall growth. So jumping from 57% in 2014 to 75% in 2019. So video really is the story in terms of why IP traffic is going to grow so much. And why is that the case? There are only so many hours in the day. I mean, some of it, sure, is going to be about video being a more and more important medium in terms of IP. Yes, so probably more hours being watched. But importantly, definition, high definition, ultra high definition is going to take a greater part of the IP traffic. So the network is going to have to take that into account. As you can see there, the standard definition, it grows a little bit but remains fairly stable. But it's the high definition and the ultra high definition that really accounts for the bulk of that growth. Obviously, it's the case because they require more megabytes per second to deliver UHD and HD services. One other feature of this is because when do people watch video? Well, more often than not, it tends to be in the evening. So what we did is look at the predictions for what the peak hour of internet use is going to be in the UK compared to what the average hour is going to be. Actually, I should say these statistics are for, or these predictions are for West Europe and other regions. So circled is is West Europe, and what we're looking at here is the ratio of internet traffic from the peak hour compared to the average hour. The blue is 2014, the green is 2019. So as you can see, that ratio increases from nearly 3 to 3.5 times. So that peak is going to be ever higher. And that's, again, just another feature of video driving this growth in internet traffic that we need to think about. And here you can see how that trend evolves over time. One thing we didn't really take into account, which may make our predictions for 2019 even more conservative than they might have been, is immersive video and virtual reality. And we're starting to see this developing as a trend right now. We didn't really factor it in because it wasn't a major thing when we put the this year's statistics together. However, recent developments have suggested that it will be more and more of a thing over the next 5 years. So perhaps we'll see that having more of an impact on the statistics than we're predicting because of the nature of how it's delivered. It's very, very high levels of traffic required to deliver a virtual reality system. So that's the first conclusion, is video and some of the features of video. Secondly, and very briefly, what do the devices look like that are going to be connected to the internet, or IP devices that are going to be used over the next 5 years? Well, as you can see from that, the growth in terms of types of devices is more around machine-to-machine. We're going to see a jump from them taking 26% of the number of devices to 48%. And so, as I said earlier, the total, and that's within the total number of devices, jumping from around 300 to 600 million in the UK. So machine-to-machine is really where it's at in terms of the growth in IP devices. And as you can see, that's 48% for, or near 50% for the UK in terms of the M2M share of overall devices in 2019. Lots of other countries are following that similar pattern, and you can see some regions, there's going to be a gap to some regions as well that we're predicting. What's really interesting there is that it's clearly not those M2M devices that are driving that previous conclusion that I drew around video. It's not the M2M devices that are driving the growth in traffic. Despite having around 50% of the number of devices, we think that M2M devices are only going to be using around 2% of the actual traffic itself. And the devices that will be using that volume of traffic are PCs, smartphones, tablets, because they're the ones that use the video, the traffic-hungry applications. And I'm just going to skip through this, but this is just to show that in terms of M2M, the vertical sectors that we see growth in, so connected home and the Internet of Things products that you'll see in the connected home are clearly going to be the biggest sector, we think. But really interestingly, things like health, things like cars, more connectivity around those areas are going to be real big growth areas over the next 5 years. I'm just going to skip over this, but again, this is just some of the examples of some of those applications for machine-to-machine. So, what are our conclusions? Rising demand for video, many more connected devices, increasing network complexity. Consumers are going to want to have more connectivity on every platform, wherever they go. And so we need to manage for complexity, as well as that really important point about capacity and congestion. Thank you.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Peter Cochrane, please.
Good morning, everyone. Right off the bat, the first thing we should observe is that networks are starting to do stuff we didn't expect. And as the IoT drifts out, we will see unusual behaviors. We are now in the business of designing and implementing networks that are going to have to cope with things that we don't know about. We understand the sociology of people. We know nothing about the sociology of things. And that's what we're facing with the IoT. So we would like to see a network that's green, secure, always available, future-proof, people sparse, automated. In fact, we want a network that just does its stuff without us getting involved in any way. So this requires, very definitely, a different approach. And the first observation is, any kind of friction in a network loses a lot of money. It has been estimated that the loss in the shipping network is in excess of $3 trillion a year, and that can be addressed by the Internet of Things. I'm going to implement my second strike capability. I've got a slight technical problem. Let's see if my thumb works. So poor infrastructure always signifies a poor economy, period. There's no ifs and buts. If we don't have infrastructure, we can't compete on the world market. Here's an interesting number. about 46% of the economic output of the planet, which is 32 trillion, can benefit from industrial internet. And if we don't have it, we don't play. So here are some of the sectors that are really impacted. And I'm going to suggest to you that some of the big ones are really things like healthcare and education, not to mention all the industrial aspects. So here's just one city in the United States where it's got really quite tired of waiting, have gone out and implemented gigabit network, and it is transforming a backward economy. They've now got companies moving into the region to access and use that facility. They're attracting in new industries, but best of all, a lot of new investment. And believe me, Chattanooga is really not a go-ahead place. So here's a bone of contention. Netcos continue to ask the same dumb question: why would anyone want these bit rates? It's possibly the only industry that will try and persuade you you want a bicycle when you've requested a BMW 7 Series. It doesn't seem to really observe what people need or what industry needs, and continues not to answer the bandwidth requirement. There are a lot of material is put out suggesting that 3, 4, 5G can satisfy the need. We do not need fiber. I can tell you as an engineer, physicist, scientist, you can't beat the laws of physics, and there is not a hope in hell that you can satisfy our bandwidth requirement and our connectivity requirement. To put it bluntly, 3G failed, 4G failed, and in that sense, 5G will fail. It is not universally available. And if you want to check it out, see how many bars you've got on this very high building right now, and it's not a lot. So here are the leaders and laggers. By the way, London is the furthest right on this graph, right at the bottom. We have on the left, the world leaders, gigabit both ways, 10 if you want it. It's symmetric, it's fiber, it does what it says on the tin. On the far right-hand side, you've got asymmetric services, and it tends to focus on words like up to and homes passed, as opposed to actually delivered and homes connected, or indeed offices connected, which is a bit of a shame.
The issue of getting faster broadband. I want to take a look at something that I've got here on my iPad. This is internet download speeds by city. Okay, I can zoom up if you want so you can see the names there. So you've got Seoul, South Korea, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Paris. These cities all have really fast access to the internet because they've made the investments in broadband. Now, here's what's interesting. Right next to it, you got Cedar Falls, Iowa. Now, Cedar Falls isn't a really big place. You only got 40,000 people in Cedar Falls. But the reason they can compete with these other world cities is because citizens got together and made the investment to bring competition in and make sure that internet speeds were just as fast there as anywhere.
Okay. This guy's got a plan. He's rolling out billions to local communities to do it themselves. So if industry won't step up to the mark and roll out gigabit broadband, he's starting to fund local cities so they can do it themselves. Bingo. So here's his view. This is Obama, right of one of his speeches. Our companies have created it, expanded it, perfected it in ways they, us, the Europeans, can't compete. That's what he thinks of us. He thinks we're on the back foot. Here's Harvard Business School. Europe has a digital crisis that has severe consequences for their global competitors. In the standout category of the Global Digital Evolution Index, only Switzerland, Ireland, and Estonia made it. The UK certainly did not. That's a bit of a shame. So do we really believe the UK can lead the rest of the world from the back of the pack on the basis of bit rates like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 megabits? Compared to the leaders, we might as well have a Morski. It just seems a ridiculous sort of stance to have. We have the capability, but the problem is this. If you have an old telephone network, every new opportunity looks like an opportunity to upgrade with bigger and better routers and more electronics. And This is the actuality. Let me tell you about my home. 5 years ago, I put in my home broadband for my village, and everybody has 34 megabits per second both ways off the church tower. BT have come to the village, and they're putting in super fast broadband, so I took the service. I went for the 80 megabit service. They promised me 60. They could only deliver 34. Okay, so I've got the 40 megabit service up to, but I get 34. But the upload speed is only 3. So when it comes to cloud computing, I'm very slightly stuffed. And it doesn't matter what you do with copper, you always finish up with that uncertainty and that asymmetry. And it's not going to improve. Doesn't matter what you do, but you're stuck with that kind of a problem. So here's my big worry. Every billion spent on the past sees us 2 billion away from the future. Because we've got to unpick and undo all that work, and we've got to re-implement. We're going to have to do the stuff again. Very sad that we're in this situation, because I can tell you, in 1990, we were ahead of the world, and we were rolling out broadband at appropriate rate, but unfortunately it was stopped. So here we are with a tech problem that's driving me nuts. This is the actual reality. Now, I think I can safely say, I'm the only ex-telephone fitter, lineman, hole digger, cable jointer, cable layer, network designer, system designer, fiber splicer, transatlantic cable layer in the audience. And it's slightly frustrating to see my country at the back of the pack when in the 1990s we were really well ahead of the game. This is not a green solution. This is not a sustainable solution. This is going to cost a fortune in energy. If you start up a new network company, you do not install 6,000 buildings, i.e. telephone exchanges. And they were put in there because that was what the reach of copper dictated. You do not spend an awful lot of money on energy. You try not to, and we do need a green solution. So I would really like to see us make the change and move on to something new. So this is an indicative list, but on the right-hand side is what you can do with an asymmetric circuit, very short list. And on the left is all the things that you would like to do. And there are things on there like telemedicine and trading, collaborative working, and all that stuff. You need bidirectional circuits. The Internet of Things, things like sustainable cities, all of that kind of thing can't be had if you do not have lots of bandwidth, bidirectional, with lots of connectivity. That's where we've got to get to. Here's the importance. 74% of digital companies operate outside of London. I live in Suffolk, very sparsely populated. We have got a lot of high tech out in the country. And being a farming community, we just do it ourselves. Farmers are a bit like that. And if we don't have fiber to the premises, these are all the casualties. We don't get cloud computing. We just get frozen out. We're no longer a player in the game. So this is the biggest farming community program in Europe. It's in Lancashire. The government implemented electronic communication for everything to do with farming, and so did the EU. They had 1 megabit or less. There was no hope of getting any bandwidth. They have now installed 500 miles of optical fiber themselves. They're serving over 30 communities and building a superb network. I have to say that fiber to the premises ain't rocket science. Your average electrician, plumber, and farmer can do it. Farmers who generally have hands the size of tennis rackets, and they're still able to splice optical fiber. Brilliant. It is worth going to look at some of these programs. Now, 5 years ago, my company did this. We were called in by Jersey Telecom. They were going to do a DSL network We took a look at it and we convinced them to put fibre everywhere, rip out all the old copper and lead and sell it. And now they've got a gigabit both ways. If you want 10, you can have it. They've got open 3G and Wi-Fi at the end of every fibre. And on a very lumpy rock in the middle of the channel, you can't serve people with good mobile without that facility. They're attracting new business to the island, and it is changing rapidly. So we now have a tyranny of action. You know, it might work in PR and politics, but it doesn't work for technology. It has to be evidence-based, it has to work, it has to cost in, and it actually has to deliver. And sadly, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you that I have been involved in this debate since 1986, and I have seen every dumb argument I can think of for not putting fibre to the home, and I think there is now sufficient evidence to say it ain't that difficult. Everybody else is doing it. We are going to get left behind. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you very, very much indeed. Go straight on. Dr. Adam Marshall, please.
Andrew, if I may just stay here rather than go to the podium. Sure. First of all, because I'm so short that I can't see over it, and second of all, and more importantly, because I haven't got any PowerPoint slides for you today. In a sense, what I want to say follows on from some of the provocations that Peter has made in his presentation, because what I'm here to do is to reflect the sort of consolidated views of the business community that I represent up and down the country, around 100,000 companies up and down the country, on their current connectivity situation and what they'd like to see in the future. And unfortunately, as Peter has sort of indicated, the starting point for a lot of these businesses is a huge level of pessimism about both what they have in terms of fibre and broadband connectivity and what they have in terms of mobile connectivity. It even extends to the simplest thing, of course, which is voice mobile connectivity and SMS mobile connectivity, even down to the basics themselves. And I have a lot of businesses openly questioning now whether the regulators are doing an adequate job of ensuring that the connectivity that's promised is delivered on the one hand, and also continuously driving up standards on the other. I have people asking me, are the people in London just asleep at the wheel? Do they know what's actually happening out here? And that's something that I think is a huge problem, of course, and it's one that really has a few different components. The obvious one is speed. None of the businesses that come and contact me say that they are getting what has been advertised to them, and very often they're getting quite a lot less. In terms of just getting the connections themselves, there's concerns about the fact that rollouts are either compromised or incomplete, and the communication that they get about when fibre is supposed to reach them is often garbled and confused. The third comes to one of Peter's main points. In terms of capacity, download versus upload speeds are affecting a huge number of my businesses, and in particular, quite a few of the services companies. I kid you not, the number of stories that I have of individuals who take pen drives from their businesses home to deliver work to clients because their home connections is better than their business connections is enormous. And in a country that is talking about its productivity levels, that is talking about raising GDP through innovation and technology, that is not a sustainable long-term solution. So when you have deprioritized businesses so that residential rollout can go first, at least that's what businesses feel is happening to them, and when you are losing productive time because you are forced to really create ridiculous workarounds in your working life, particularly if you're outside of a dense metropolitan area where the rollouts are often complete, we have a problem indeed. And there is this feeling, as I say, that regulators seem soft on providers and on sharpening competition in the business fibre market. So what do businesses then expect, I think, going forward? I mean, the first is that what they're sold actually passes the Ronseal test. Peter's example is exactly the one that that comes forward. If you're told you're going to get X megabits download and upload speeds, you should get X megabits download and upload speeds. They want more competition in the market. They want to be able to choose between more providers when they can. I'm not one to enter into discussions between various providers in the market about what one is doing or what the other one is not. That's not really a place for me to go into. But businesses do want to see more competition because, of course, they want more choice. They also want clearer conditions around government investment. The number of businesses that are incredibly confused about what the public sector is doing and what the state's investment is doing versus what private investment is doing and what their own investment needs to be is tremendous. They just don't know how those components fit together. And of course, they want regulatory enforcement. They don't want a huge sort of throwing up the regulatory framework and putting it all up in the air again and changing it. They want enforcement of the existing framework so that they can get what they have been promised. So in our briefing note, we had a question about, you're encouraged to consider what ubiquitous, ultra-fast coverage will mean for life in the UK. That's really a dream for far too many of the businesses that I deal with. Ubiquitous coverage, certainly there isn't. Ultra-fast, certainly not either. And when you talk about the UK as a whole, the number of counties and cities reporting not spots means that actually what you're dealing with is a piece of Swiss cheese. So what do the businesses want? Let's get the basics right, first and foremost. Make sure that what you're being sold is what you are actually delivered. The second is upgrading, when we talk about national strategy, like the Obama example, upgrade our targets and our aspirations. When government talks about ultra-fast being, 30 megabits plus, when we've got, as Peter was saying, cities delivering one gigabit up and down, is completely silly. We need to be talking about much higher aspirations. Government needs to make a bigger commitment as well, and one of the biggest things that we've asked for in the spending review is that as cuts move forward, one of the things that actually needs to be increased is consideration of digital as part of our core national infrastructure, and the investment to pump prime more private sector investment, be that from providers and be that from businesses, is going to be hugely important. And finally, improve communication with businesses who are affected as well. Businesses as consumers in this marketplace feel hard done by. They're not getting what they were promised. They're unsure who does what, who pays, and what they need to do next in order to satisfy their basic requirements. Surely we can do better so that I don't have to come here and talk endlessly about companies literally jury-rigging solutions to their capacity and bandwidth issues, and so that I don't go around the country to various chambers of commerce and continually hear the stories of my company's growing really fast, but the only constraint on us is the fact that I can't get product to my client in Dubai or in Buenos Aires or wherever else it might be. It's a productivity drag. It should be a thing of the past, and it should be a top priority, I think, both of all of us in business and of the public sector as well, when they consider their investment priorities going forward. Thanks. I look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you. Our final presentation, Dana Toback, please.
I'm going to follow Adam's lead and actually stay seated, if that's all right, also without a presentation. Well, I have to say, I find myself in an extremely unique position, although I guess you can't say extremely unique, but of actually being able to finish by saying I'm here. And the reason I say that is because usually these panel discussions are people arguing about strategies and what's required, and should it be 30 megs or 10 megs and the USO of 10 megs. But I'm with you. We started Hyperoptic in 2011. We deliver 1 gig symmetric services in the UK. Granted, we focus on urban areas and specifically on multi-dwelling units. We have publicly stated that we've passed or serving 100,000 homes. That number's substantially more. We'll release the next number shortly. And we work both in new builds and retrofits. We also serve businesses. We recently started our business team that focuses on what we call multi-business units, or MBUs, and also serve businesses that are in the residential buildings. And it's really quite interesting because every time one of those reports comes out that says no one needs more than 30 megs, or the average consumer only needs this, I really chuckle to myself, because we offer 3 products. A gig symmetric product, fantastic for people who really want that ultra speed. A 100 meg symmetric product, which quite frankly is the one we expect most people to take. And then we have a 20 meg product, which is a value product, essentially oriented towards people who just want solid broadband that they can count on. And what we find, surprisingly, and against any business plan we originally put together, is about 20% of people actually take the gig product. And I think that's really interesting in a model where you have other companies saying that people actually don't need those speeds. Now, whether they need them or not, or how much capacity they use of it, well, that's not really ours to say. But I can tell you that our average peak bandwidth, when I was at B, so sorry, a little bit of past there, is that myself and my co-founder previously founded B Broadband, who was the first to offer ADSL 2+ in 2005, later became the O2 network and is now part of the Sky network. But in essence, when we first launched the 24 meg product in 2005, the response from journalists was, why would anyone ever need 24 meg? But at that time, when I left B, which was in about 2007, we were seeing about average peak usage of just over 200 kilobits a second. With hyperoptic, in our first few months of operations, we were kind of curious to see where that would play out, and we were coming in at about 300, 350 kilobits per second average peak usage. And we thought, okay, it's higher than B, what we would expect, but we've got such bigger speeds, one would think that would go up. Well, I can tell you that the latest report from my networks team, we're seeing 1.1 megs a second of average peak usage. And I think that's because of some of the things that were shared earlier in terms of what people are doing with it, but also that people are more reliant on broadband. It's not just for email, it's not just for surfing and shopping. People are integrating in their lives in every way. I have a gig at home. I'm sorry, I don't want anyone to get upset about that, but I do. And my two young daughters are incredibly spoiled because they're used to watching their videos and playing their games with that type of bandwidth. And of course, we did a skiing holiday earlier this year, and there was average broadband, probably 10 megs a second on wireless. And they were just saying, Mom, this is awful, nothing's working. And of course, the point of good connectivity is not for games and watching cartoons, despite anything they may think, but to provide the future. And when I think about it today, is if we are satisfied with 10, 20, 30 megabits per second, then what applications will people create? What will be the innovations of tomorrow? And I think one of the main drivers for hyperoptic and for me to create a network that offers these types of speeds and potentially offers 1 gig and even 10 gig, although to be honest, we've not received any requests for 10 gig, but we could service it if that's what was asked, is what can people create for tomorrow? So the virtual reality that was shown earlier, I'm a deep believer of that, but also healthcare, and more importantly, and I think, and I love this debate, when we talk about business versus residential, and actually the story you told about people taking their business home. I think in the world of tomorrow, that line between people going at 9 o'clock in the morning to the office, leaving at 6 o'clock, all of that's going to change. Because there's no particular reason when you have virtual reality, when you have fantastic speeds at home, when you have the ability to communicate with people all over the world and create teams in a virtual sense, you're not required to only keep those working hours. And people who want to get involved in the workforce on a part-time basis or off-hour basis now can add to the productivity of the country, and that's what excites me. And I think when I look at what hyperoptic is doing, and of course we wish to expand, we want to offer 1 gig in more places, we want to engage in the debate of why 1 gig is important to the country, but it's quite interesting to me because the barriers that we face are not about investment, as was previously mentioned by Andrew. Our investors are a fund of George Soros, so they're quite bullish on the UK and believing that we could make the jump from where we are to where we need to be, and that hyperoptic can be part of that jump. But it's really interesting when you have, for example, the USO service commitment. There's more that government can be doing today than just making a pronouncement that we should all have great broadband, or not great broadband, as the case may be. One of our biggest challenges, as an example, in order to do what we do, we bring our own last mile cabling into buildings. So any of those cranes that you see out there for residential buildings, our cabling is likely being installed. So it's our cabling that's going into the buildings. It's not reliant on the old copper network, and then we bring fiber into the building and use that to connect up customers. And the reason the reason that that's important, of course, is that in order for us to put our network out, we need the permission of the freeholders. And when we started Hyperoptic in 2011, we assumed we were a technology company. It's a broadband company delivering next generation fiber. Seems to me that should be a technology company. What we are today is quite a bit different. We are a property company. So we've had to expand our expertise into property experts who are familiar with developers, freeholders, the people who own freeholds and accept their kind of their ground rents that basically treat it as a financial instrument, not as a place where people live and create their livelihoods. And that means that our approach to, it's not just about digging streets, it's about making sure that we get permission to put that networks in. And one of the biggest things that's preventing us from being able to fulfill what we can do for the final 5% is actually government. So what we're seeing is that local councils, despite our offering to install our services free of charge to those councils, are still anxious, reluctant, unable to act, whatever the case may be. So when we've been asked by DCMS, what can you do for the final 5? We say we could do a lot for the final 5, somewhere between 50 to about 80% of urban not spots. We're happy to invest our own money in order to bring that service, and yet that is a place where it's faltering. I think another interesting point to raise, and this is, I guess it's not really public information, but I feel this crowd will appreciate this point. We're in the middle of a discussion, if you could call it that, with the ASA, so the Advertising Standards Authority, who is really confused by what to do with our 1 gig product, because they say, well, no one can get a gig. We said, that's true, mainly because their PCs, quite frankly, aren't up to the task. So if you do a speed test, you won't get a gig, and the speed test servers aren't up to the task because they're not set up for it. And they say, well, therefore, people aren't getting a gig. And we say, well, look, I'll show you that I'm giving them a gig connection. It's on my switches. I've got the backhaul to be able to give them that gig. There's room on the network. It has nothing to do with the network connection, but they're not getting a gig. And I think when we have whether it's a regulatory, it's not really a regulatory body, but an official body who doesn't understand the technology and doesn't appreciate that they've allowed the public to be hoodwinked into believing that FTTC is fiber, that there isn't any difference in different technologies, that they shouldn't expect to get 80 meg just because they're buying an 80 meg product, but don't appreciate that a gig product represents a completely different technology. Well, there's a problem there too, and that is something that isn't about money, but it's about, who's going to explain the problem. And I think there was a quote from the debate about the 10 gig USO service commitment, or it is about where we were, and forgive me if I don't have the final details, but this was going around one of the lists that I was on, that one of the MPs asked the question, what is the cloud and where is it? So I think what we find is if we really are serious about this, and as you can probably hear from my accent, Obama is my president. I won't tell you whether I voted for him or not, but just to say, I think that vision, that appreciation that you do need to not just bring it from the top, but also look at all the various stakeholders, because it's just not that simple. When I have private freeholders who are able to just not sign a way leave or expect to get paid year in, year out just to sign a paper in order for me to install my network, when now the government is saying by law people should have that right, there's more that has to be done. It's not so simple just to make a statement that people should have it. And what I'm happy to say is that people who do have potential access to it do take it. So as I said, we have about 20% of our customers on a gig, and more importantly, despite the big packages that some of my competitors are putting together and the different options and promotions that are coming out, after we've been in a building for about a year, we get an average of about 30% penetration, customer uptake. And we're quite proud of that. So I think there's definitely evidence that people want more and deserve more.
Well, those are 4 absolutely outstanding presentations, right on the subject. The picture is not completely black. There are examples of success in the UK, whether Jersey or was it the Lancashire farmers that I pick up, or Dana's customers, Dana's 100,000 plus homes. But overall, there is a big difference to the world's best. Our panel is telling us the average connection, as Peter's graph showed, is sort of completely different, but it's also uneven, unreliable. Adam's phrase, Swiss cheese, and Dana sort of started to hint some of the reasons for that. In this case, the sort of planning framework, and then looking forward, what are the possibilities for the UK? Well, to link to the future world economy, just as simple as that, and our panel doesn't know exactly what those new opportunities are going to be, and I think Dana's point was partly that we don't need to know. We know there's going to be innovation. We just want to be part of it. But certainly in healthcare, certainly education. Peter showed the list of sectors, and then going back to where Matt started, there is enormous consumer demand for services via connections. So I think it's actually a very clear message from our panelists. Can we so let us. Do we agree? Do we think the panel is right? Let's get some thoughts to interrogate them for 10 minutes or so. I can see hands going up. Can I please ask our speakers to give their names first? So we'll start here and then go to there, sir and sir.
Richard Hoover, Chairman of the Broadband Stakeholder Group. This is clearly an anti-establishment morning, and I gave a speech last week about the establishment versus the anti-establishment. I don't take views myself. My question is to Matt, because I think he was slightly more neutral. Actually, the data, when you look at it, European scorecard, etc., UK comes out pretty well relative to other countries. America does not come out well. Would you like to comment on relativities to other countries of the UK performance?
Thank you. Sir, that's it.
Hi there, my name is Malcolm Corbett. I run the Independent Networks Cooperative Association, which is very much the anti-establishment camp. We are the anti-establishment camp. My question, thank Dana. Well, I want to say thank you very much. Dana's about to deliver gigabit connectivity to my home and my home office, more importantly, in Woolwich, very, very soon. We're very much looking forward to it. Why? Because, frankly, I really want the Macs that we use for work and entertainment purposes to update a bit faster when they have to download the latest operating system and all those sorts of good things. It's basically reliable, high-speed connectivity is what we want for work and for entertainment. My question is, on Saturday I was interviewed by Sky, just up the road there, and by the BBC radio on the 10 megabit per second announcement that came out of the government, which took quite a few of us by surprise, many people. What does the panel think about this 10 megabits per second commitment? Is it useful or not?
Thank you. And sir, please.
Thanks. Joe Garner, CEO, OpenReach. I came here today because I think these are such important questions. It's the right questions we're asking. They matter to business, they matter to people, they matter to society. And we're very focused on answering these questions in OpenReach. And whilst we might all disagree on how we get there, I think that everyone in this room shares the objectives in terms of speed, coverage, service, etc. A couple of things, if I can. Whilst we're debating where we go from here, as was raised earlier, I think it's important we do reflect on where here is. I saw a lot of data there. I too look at the European broadband scorecard from Ofcom, which does say that the UK leads all major European countries in terms of next generation access. Whether it should be FTTP or FTTC is a technology question. The question that society is asking is how do we get the speed and coverage and service that we need? And when we ask that question, I think the answer to me is obvious. It's all available technologies. And we lead Europe today because we use all available technologies. I believe in FTTP. I believe in a fibre vision. And the company that has built the most FTTP in this country is OpenReach. And whilst it's easy to criticise our engineers who are out in the rain building this network, it's also thanks to them that we've got the speeds we've got today and not the 2 megabits that we had a few years ago. And just on the promise versus reality, it's a critically important question. But a little known fact is that when OpenReach offers a speed check and a line, we stand behind that. And if we don't deliver that, we refund and take the line back. Therefore, I think there is an important question about how that is then marketed through the chain, but it should not be confused with the delivery of the network.
Thank you. So these are exactly the questions we need. You know, what is the true international comparison, and what are the current government's commitment? I'm going to just going to take one more question, because I fear for time we might have to have this as the sort of closing questions to this panel. So, sir, in the second row, we're just going to have to go in the order of hands that I saw, please.
Yeah, it's Robert Grindle from Deutsche Bank. I'm not sure whether we can describe banks as establishment quite at the moment, but I can attest to Dr. Cochrane's BT. I studied under the BT professor of optoelectronics about 20 years ago. At the time, people thought that optics would take over the world. It would even find its way into silicon logic devices. Actually, copper works really well for some applications. And, you know, I do have a BMW, actually, but it's 12 years old. And, you know, I'd like a new one, but it's pretty expensive. And if I hold on a bit and sweat my existing one, perhaps I'll get a better one in the end. Does copper not just keep getting better and better? Fiber will come eventually, but is it time to keep sweating as well as investing, rather than having it all at once? Thank you.
Thank you. So as I say, those are excellent questions. Yes, just slightly testing. I think the conclusions of the panel. You know, what is the true comparison with Europe? That last point, you know, sweating is perhaps not the most attractive way of putting it. But anyway, you know, can we get more out of the existing infrastructure rather than focusing on you know the true possibilities of ultra fast? It's just how to get there. And then what do we think of the government's commitment? I think those are excellent. Can I just ask, we started a little bit late, and I want to keep to time if I can. So sort of shorter answers, please, in the same order from the speakers. So Matt first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting set of questions. Thank you. I think in terms of the relativity points, yes, there are figures that show that the UK is at the forefront in Europe. I think the question I'd ask is, you know, is that good enough? Are we holding ourselves back still by not you know, embracing other expanding the network or whatever it is, more investment in the network? I think Dana's points were really key here. You know, are we taking this from a business and consumer approach in terms of what those inventions, what those possibilities might be in the future, and are we providing the infrastructure that allows that to happen? I think the UK has a hugely positive ecosystem for innovation. You know, we have 4 of the top 6 world universities. We have greatly skilled people. We have fantastic finance available. I think we need to build on that and make sure that we've got a network that does embrace the future, that doesn't hold us back, and does allow us to do some of those things and position the UK as a great country in the future. Now, I mean, we're neutral, obviously, in terms of how that's achieved, but we think it should be possible. We think we should still be very forward-thinking in the UK in terms of how we get there. But I think we shouldn't lack ambition.
Thank you. Peter, please.
Well, the question in my mind is, do we want to be number one amongst all the lame ducks of Europe? Or do we want to actually be out there competing with the best of the world? Competition's not in Europe. The competition is in Southeast Asia and North America. So if you think we can compete with 10 megabits per second one way and 1 megabit the other, and we're going to hold our end up against Southeast Asia and America, then we're on the right tack. Brilliant. Stick with it.
Did you have a view on the Prime Minister's statement about, I mean, maybe it speaks for itself, but...
Oh, pretty dumb.
Adam.
How do you compete with that? I'll start with the USO thing. I think it's useful for one reason, which is it's the first time we've seen a recognition of the fact that this is a critical service for businesses and homes, and for individuals in the same way that other utilities are. And I think that's a positive. My concern is that the low threshold that has been set becomes the thing that gets leveled down to. And in particular, when we've seen just what, looking back at everything that's been said this morning about what businesses will need and Matt's predictions for the future as to what people will be using, if there is any leveling down, that would be a huge concern for me. I think Joe made an extremely important point on the point about speed checks, and I think that's one of the things that I was referring to when I talked about communication with business and residential users of these services. I think it's incumbent on all providers, not any one in particular, but all providers really to ramp up how they communicate with their customers and explain to them exactly what they're getting, why, and even to the point that it might be your own technology that's constraining you rather than your connection in certain cases, or in fact there's a difficulty with the connection and we have something that we need to do in order to improve your service. That level of communication I think has been lacking, and I talked earlier about the intersection between what the providers are investing, what individuals or businesses or collectives in some cases are investing, and of course what the public sector is putting in. The user doesn't understand that, so all of the blame gets put on the provider, and I think a greater and clearer explanation exactly about how those intersections work is really important to keeping the user happy.
And Dana, please.
Okay. My frustration with the 10 meg statement, as I indicated earlier, was really that it was like the 10-year vision without the how are we going to do it, and so I think for people in the know and in the industry, I think it lacked a bit of credibility, and I think that's very dangerous when you're trying to make a statement like that. I think I do agree that recognizing the importance of it, but without having the next level of, well, how you're going to do it, or who's going to be involved and who are the stakeholders, I think that's a tricky bit. As far as, I'm an OpenReach customer, so Joe and I have differing views and yet work together all at the same time. And I would say in Joe's position, I think OpenReach has done quite a bit of good. I think the rollout of FTTC has gone very quickly. I think the question is not about whether or not we should invest in copper, it's where is your line? Should we have a 3-year horizon, a 5-year horizon, a 20-year horizon? And I think, and I don't know if this is the right point to bring up this topic because it's so heated, but I think the question of whether having OpenReach as the premier owner of the duct and infrastructure network sitting under a publicly traded company in the way that it is makes sense. And I know that debate is coming to the forefront. So if you were looking at the UK public good for the long term, would you not have a company, and I know we have a speaker from Stocap coming in the next session, would you not look to just build a ubiquitous dark fiber network that could be used for any purpose under the sun? And that was not that is not what OpenReach is there to do. And that is therefore one of the reasons that's holding us back as a country. So if we were serious about wanting not just residential fiber and business fiber, but also mobile phone use, the ability to have connectivity for any purpose under the sun, you would want that dark fiber network. And it will cost a lot of money, and it will take a long time for it to pay back. But you know what? There are people who have long-term visions of where they want to put their pension funds, or where they want to put that type of investment. It's out there. People would happily invest in such a vehicle, and I think that is one of the main issues facing the UK at the moment.
Thank you, and we'll be coming on to the investment question in the third panel. So those questions, I think, slightly tested, as I say, tested our panel, said, hang on, is it quite as black now as the presentations may have suggested, and our panel said, avoiding those comparisons, but the true comparison really is with the possibilities of the future, and they are not confident that they do want to see real change from the current position in order to grasp those possibilities. So I think as a panel to talk about the current UK position and the possibilities, I think we did extremely well. I would like to therefore thank our panel. I'm going to hand over to the chair of the next panel, Jonathan Ford, the chief leader writer of the Financial Times. Welcome, Jonathan. So I will invite he and our next panel to come up. And as we do that, please do thank our first panel. Thank you.